The larger the army, the louder the charge, the greater the confidence. For centuries, commanders believed one simple truth: numbers decide everything. Bring enough soldiers to the battlefield, and victory becomes inevitable. Most of the time, they were right, but sometimes history refuses to follow logic.
Charge!
Sometimes strength collapses, sometimes noise loses to silence, and sometimes discipline beats sheer force. On that morning, the difference between the two armies was visible long before the first sword was drawn. Across the open field stood a massive force. Thousands of soldiers stretched across the horizon like a moving wall of steel. Banners waved, drums thundered, voices echoed. Their confidence was absolute. They had won before with numbers alone, and they expected today to be no different. Victory to them was already decided. Opposite them stood a much smaller force. Fewer men, fewer resources, no overwhelming presence. But something about them was different. They weren't shouting. They weren't rushing. They weren't afraid. They stood in silence, perfectly aligned, shields locked, shoulder to shoulder. Every soldier knew exactly where he belonged. There was no chaos, no wasted movement, only control. Their strength was not size, it was discipline. As the sun rose higher, the larger army began to move, first slowly, then faster, then charging. The ground shook beneath thousands of boots, dust filled the air. War cries echoed across the valley. It looked unstoppable, like a storm rolling forward, crushing everything in its path. Most armies would have panicked at that sight. But the smaller force did not move. They waited, breathing steady, eyes forward, trusting the formation. Because discipline means resisting fear. It means doing nothing until the exact right moment. The charge grew closer, closer, closer. And then, impact. The massive wave of soldiers crashed into the smaller line. But instead of breaking, the line held. Sheer force met something stronger than steel. Order. Shields absorbed the blow. Feet dug into the ground. Not a single soldier stepped back. The attackers expected collapse. Instead, they hit a wall. Momentum vanished. Behind the front ranks, thousands kept pushing forward, unaware that the line had stopped. The pressure crushed their own soldiers. Movement became impossible. Their numbers, once their greatest weapon, now worked against them. Chaos began to spread. Orders overlapped. Voices shouted different commands. Units collided with each other. No one could see clearly. No one could move freely. Meanwhile, the smaller force moved like one body. When one soldier tired, another replaced him. When one shield lowered, another rose. Every step was synchronized, every motion deliberate. No energy wasted, no panic allowed. Time became their ally. Minutes turned into hours. The larger army burned strength quickly. They charged harder, pushed louder, tried to force a breakthrough through aggression alone. But brute strength without coordination only creates exhaustion. Sweat replaced confidence. Breathing grew heavier. Attacks slowed, and doubt began to grow. How could they still be standing? How could so few hold back so many? Questions like that are dangerous in battle, because doubt spreads faster than fear. The disciplined force sensed it immediately, and they didn't rush, they didn't chase, they didn't lose control. Instead, they did something far more powerful. They stayed calm, small, precise movements. Short, controlled pushes, perfect timing, each action carefully measured. While the larger army drowned in chaos, the smaller one stayed clear and focused. That difference decided everything. Eventually, the noise changed. The shouting weakened, the charge slowed, and for the first time, the larger army stepped back. Not because they were destroyed, but because they were broken. Broken by confusion, broken by exhaustion, broken by their own lack of control. One step back became 10. 10 became retreat. What began as an unstoppable force ended in disorder. The smaller army did not chase blindly. Discipline had carried them this far. Discipline would finish it. They simply held their ground and watched as the massive force withdrew. When the battlefield finally fell silent, only one formation still stood, unbroken, unshaken, victorious, not because they were stronger, not because they were greater in number, but because they never lost control. News of the battle spread quickly. Commanders studied it for years, and the lesson was impossible to ignore. Power without discipline is fragile. Numbers without order are useless. Noise without control collapses. But discipline multiplies strength. It turns few into many. It turns fear into focus, and it turns survival into victory. The soldiers who stood that day did not defeat sheer force with violence. They defeated it with unity, with patience, with control. And that is why this battle is remembered. Because on that field, history proved something extraordinary. When chaos charged, discipline stood still, and discipline won. The larger the army, the louder the charge, the greater the confidence. For centuries, commanders trusted one simple belief: numbers decide everything. Bring enough men to the battlefield, and victory becomes unavoidable. Strength, they believed, could crush anything that stood in its way. Most of the time they were right, but not always. Because sometimes history teaches a different lesson, a quieter one, a lesson that isn't about force or fury, but about control. This is the story of the day discipline beat sheer force. At sunrise, the difference between the two armies was already clear. Across the open plain stood a massive force, thousands of soldiers wretched across the horizon like an iron tide. Banners snapped in the wind, drums pounded, officers shouted commands that echoed through the valley, armor clattered, boots shook the earth. They looked unstoppable. They believed they were unstoppable. Their confidence came from numbers alone. They had won battles simply by overwhelming their enemies. Every previous victory had taught them the same thing: rush forward hard enough, and resistance disappears. Opposite them stood a much smaller army. Fewer soldiers, fewer banners, no thunderous drums, just silence. They stood in clean, straight lines, shields locked together, spears angled perfectly. No one shouted, no one rushed. Faces were calm, focused, almost still. They did not look powerful. They looked prepared. Every soldier knew his place. Every movement had been practiced. They weren't thinking about glory or fear. They were thinking about formation, because their strength was not size, it was discipline. When the signal to advance came, the larger army moved first. At first it was steady, then faster, then a full charge. The ground trembled beneath thousands of boots. War cries filled the air. Dust rose like smoke. From a distance, it looked like a storm racing forward, ready to swallow everything. Most armies would have panicked at that sight. But the smaller force did not move. They waited, breathing steady, hearts controlled, eyes forward, because discipline means resisting fear. It means trusting the plan even when chaos is rushing toward you. The charge grew closer, 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 and then the impact came. Steel slammed into shields, wood cracked, the sound exploded across the field, but something unexpected happened. The line did not break. The charge stopped. The massive wave of soldiers collided with the smaller formation and simply stalled. Sheer force had met something stronger than strength: order. The defenders absorbed the blow like a wall of stone, shields held firm, feet dug into the dirt. Not a single step backward, not a single gap opened. Behind the front ranks, thousands of attackers kept pushing forward, unaware that the line had stopped. Their own numbers crushed them together. They couldn't swing weapons properly. They couldn't move freely. Their greatest advantage had become their greatest weakness. Confusion spread instantly. Orders overlapped, voices clashed, soldiers collided with each other. No one could hear clearly. No one could see what was happening ahead. Chaos had replaced control. Meanwhile, the smaller force moved like a machine. When one soldier tired, another replaced him. When one shield lowered, another rose. Every step synchronized, every motion precise. No wasted energy, no panic. Minutes passed, then more. The larger army kept attacking again and again, each charge weaker than the last. They burned strength too quickly, shouting, pushing, forcing, fighting their own formation as much as the enemy. Sweat replaced confidence. Breathing grew heavier. Arms slowed, but the disciplined line remained steady. They didn't fight harder. They fought smarter. Short movements, small adjustments, perfect timing. They understood something their enemy didn't. Battles aren't won by how hard you strike. They're won by how long you can stand. As exhaustion spread through the attackers, something more dangerous followed. Doubt. At first it was small. A glance backward, a slower step, a hesitation before charging again. But doubt spreads faster than fear. How are they still standing? Why aren't they breaking? Questions like these are poison on a battlefield, because once an army loses belief, strength disappears. The disciplined force sensed it immediately. And still, they did not rush. They didn't chase. They didn't celebrate. They simply maintained control. Then came the turning point. A short, precise push forward, perfectly timed, not aggressive, not reckless, just enough to disrupt the fragile enemy formation. That small movement shattered what little coordination remained. Suddenly, the massive army didn't look massive anymore. It looked lost. What had begun as a thunderous charge became scattered noise. And then slowly the retreat began. Not all at once, not dramatically, just small steps backward, then more, then entire groups pulling away. Momentum gone, confidence gone, the unstoppable force stopping. The smaller army did not pursue wildly, because discipline does not disappear in victory. They held formation. They watched. They waited until the field was truly theirs. When silence finally returned, only one line still stood, unbroken, unshaken, victorious. No cheers filled the air, no celebration, just quiet breathing and steady hands. They hadn't won through brute strength. They hadn't overwhelmed their enemy. They had simply refused to lose control, and that made all the difference. In the days the tea followed, commanders tried to explain what had happened. Some blamed terrain, some blamed luck. But the truth was simpler. Power without discipline is fragile. Numbers without order collapse. Chaos defeats itself. But discipline multiplies strength. It turns a small force into an unbreakable wall. It turns fear into focus. It turns survival into victory. And on that day, history proved something unforgettable. When chaos charged forward with all its might, discipline stood still, and discipline won.